The next step in inputting data into Match Textiles 2.0 is Colorant Set. But before we do a Colorant Set, we have to make sure we put in a quality style and a dye process. And since we'll be measuring in our primaries into the Colorant Set, we also make sure that we have calibrated our instrument. So let's get started with Colorant Set. We'll double click on the Colorant Set icon. On the left hand side it shows the folders that are possible to store the Colorant Set in, but we will just double click on the white space on the right hand side. It will open up our Colorant Set, and at the top left we have our header values for our Colorant Set. And the Colorant Set is for cotton dyes, so these are going to be reactive dyes. So the name of our Colorant Set we are going to call reactives. So we type in reactives. Okay, and then we'll click in the ID box, and the reactive's name is brought down to the ID box. Notice too that our next to our name is an asterisk. That means it's a mandatory input, along with the ID has a mandatory input. Industry type, textile, is already put in for us. Dye process is not put in, so we can double click on this green space. Opens up a box where we can browse for our dye process that we've already put in. Cotton exhaust, we'll highlight it and click OK, and then accept. It brings in our dye process and liquor ratio that goes along with that dye process. Next we'll put in our substrate delivery. This comes from our quality style, so we'll double click. It'll bring up our substrate delivery box. We will browse again for our substrate delivery. Bleached cotton, we'll click OK. Cotton jersey, blank dyeing, we'll click accept. So now we filled in all our mandatory header information for our Colorant Set. We can do set store so that we have this information stored. The next thing that we're going to do is add our colorants to the Colorant Set. So we'll click on New Colorant, and since we haven't put in any colorants yet, we can browse, but there aren't any in here. So we'll have to put these in new. So we'll click on the New button, and we notice the name is mandatory, so we click here, and we'll type in Blue G, and we'll click in the supplier ID. I'll also put in a price here. We'll put in $3 per pound, or euro, or whatever your unit is, and we'll click OK. So now we've created our dye stuff name, Blue G, and now we have to put in our quantities of our primary, starting from the lowest to highest. So we'll go 0.05, 0.1, 0.25, 0.5, 0.75, 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3. So I put in 10 primary concentrations. We recommend at a minimum we do 8. And we're going to, the type of sample input will be measurements, as we talked about before. We're going to measure in, and it puts in our first primary concentration, Blue G, at 0.05%. We're going to make sure we click the multiple measurement option. That means that we will take an average reading of 4 readings. So it'll take 4 measurements and average that into 1. Okay? We need to present our sample to the spectro so it's opaque, folded enough so you can't see through it, and we are going to rotate and move the piece after each of the readings. Okay, so we're going to click on the spectro. We're going to take our first measurement. So it takes its first measurement. We're going to remove the specimen, move it on the piece, and rotate it 90 degrees. We'll take our second measurement. Again, after our second measurement, remove the piece, rotate it 90 degrees, and place it against the spectro. Click on Measure. And we're going to move it one more time, rotate it 90 degrees, and reposition. Click Measure. So after 4 measurements, we will look down here at the deviation and make sure our deviation is below 0.1. If it's above 0.1, it may mean that we have hit a bad spot or a piece of lint or something like that, and we could take out an individual reading if there were a bad one in here. But it seems to be okay, so we will click Accept, and you'll notice that the 0.05 is put into our calibration series, and it increments up to our next calibration series. Okay, it's a 0.1. So at this point, for the purposes of this video, we're not going to measure it 4 times. We're just going to measure it 1 time. But you should always measure 4 times to get the best data, because the data that you're using here will be the data that you will use going forward for all your recipes. So we click on Measure. Okay, so it puts in our second measurement, and we'll look on the right-hand side down at the bottom where it's starting to draw our K/S curve. It increments it up to our next measurement, which is 0.25. So we'll click on the measurement button. Okay, so now we have our third measurement in there, and it increments to our fourth measurement, 0.5. So we'll place our sample there and take our measurement. Okay, it's drawing a fairly straight line on our K/S graph. That's what we like to see. Move on to our next sample, 0.75. Okay, so to our next sample, 1%. Measure. Okay, so we're beginning to see our curve start to tail down slightly. That means it's reaching its saturation, going to reach towards its saturation point. There's 1.5. Okay. And 2. I see a little bit of the curve tailing off at 2%. We're going to do 2.5. Oh, we see a little bit of dip in the curve. That's fine. We can correct that in our next screen. But we're going to continue reading with our 3%. So we've done our measurement, and we look like one here. The 2% may be off, but we finished our measurement. We can't do anything with it here, so we'll click on Accept. And on the next screen, we can see our colorant set and all of our calibration samples put in here. Okay. So right now we're looking at our substrate line here, and then each one of our percent reflectance lines for each one of our primaries. Okay. Lightest at the top, going down to the darkest. But what we would like to see is the K/S graph for this primary series. So we click on blue G here, and we right-click and choose K/S absolute strength. This will show us the K/S curve for this dye stuff. And we see a little bit of a dip here. So there's a few things we can do. One thing we can do is we can exclude the 2%. We can click on Don't Use, and it draws the line through the 2%. So that might be good. We can also use a smooth curve, where it will smooth out the curve to take out any bumps, draw the best fit curve. We're going to leave it at measured for right now. So those are two options, but we can also try to measure back in our 2% as well. And we can do that. Let's try that. So if you go down to your 2% calibration sample, highlight it, and right-click and remeasure calibration sample, and click on Measure, and click on Multiple, and then Measure. And this is where remeasuring this 2% to see if we can get a better spot on the curve for our 2%. Okay, so we've measured it in again. Let's go back to our blue G, and we're going to right-click and do K over S absolute strength. And again, that didn't straighten out our curve. But the only problem I see here is the 2%. So my option in this case would, the best option I think would be to take out this 2%, and that straightens out the curve. Leave it at measured. If you had more than one spot where there were a little bit waviness in this curve, you could change it to either smooth or automatic. Smooth being the most dramatic smoothing of the curve. Automatic being a smoothing, but it doesn't smooth down towards the bottom of the curve as much because of substrate effects. So that's why they created automatic. They wanted not to smooth out the substrate effects at the bottom of the curve. So, but we're going to leave it on measured and just take out this 2% calibration sample. So we're done here. So we're going to do calculate single. That means we're going to lock in this method of smoothing, just measured, and store. So in case something happens, we won't lose this data. Now for the second colorant coming in, we're going to put in, we are going to bring this in as from imported data, from data we've imported from a dye stuff supplier or somewhere else or another company. So first of all, again, we don't have the product name. We only have the product we've done, which is the blue G. So we're going to do a new one. And we have to know the name of this product that we're importing. So I know that it to be yellow 3RS. Okay, so yellow 3RS. Click on product supplier, actual price. We just put in a price of 4. It could be dollars, euros, or whatever your unit. And concentration at 100. We don't usually change this 100 concentration because that's what it's supplied at 100%. If later on down the road they sent you a different concentration, you could adjust it from the 100 to make it correct. We click OK. Okay, so it automatically fills in our quantities, but we don't need that because we're going to bring these primary samples in from the database. So we're going to go from the database and we're going to browse, and we're going to go to the import folder because by default when you import something, it will go into the import folder. So we're going to highlight the first sample, then use the shift key and highlight the last sample, and then click OK. Okay, so this curve, you know, it's kind of weird looking. So, but we can't adjust it at this time. We can just go accept and take a look at it on the other page. So this curve is not exactly smooth or a straight line or a smooth curve. So this might be a good candidate for smoothing. So if we go to smooth, this smooths out the curve. Now we don't normally want to use smooth if we don't have to, but in this case it was hard to determine which one of these samples we were going to change to make this curve better. So we can smooth it out to get the best fit curve that we can. Okay, so that is our second dye stuff. Again, we can do calculate single and store. Okay. And we're going to do another dye stuff, and this one we're going to measure in. And we're going to do new colorant. And again, we don't have this color, it's a new one. So the name of it is Red B. We click in Product Supplier ID, we'll give it a price, maybe $6 per pound or euro. We click OK, and we'll put in our new concentrations for this dye stuff because it's different from the old other ones. 1.1, 0.2, 0.4, 0.75, 1.25, 2, 2.7, and 3.5. And we're going to do from measurements here. So we'll measure, put our first sample in and measure. 0.2. 0.4. 0.75. 1.25. 2.0. And our 2.7. We notice it's a problem in this build curve here with this curve kind of disappearing the way it is. But we're going to continue on and measure our 3.5. And again, we see our measurements here. There's a little dip in this curve. We can't do anything on this page, but after we accept it, we can work with these primaries. Okay, so we have red B. We have our substrate here and our primaries lining up down below from lightest to darkest. Okay, but what we want to look at, our K over S curve. K over S, absolute strength. Okay, so we see here that our 2.7 is a little bit off here. So one thing we could do is we could try remeasuring that sample. So we could set our 2.7 up there again. And we could highlight down at the bottom our primary 2.7, right click, remeasure calibration sample. It inputs the name for us. We can click on measure. And we can do multiple if we want, multiple. And we can accept this, and we'll go back to red B again, and we'll right click K over S absolute strength. We see that that didn't correct our curve. So what we might have to do now is omit this 2.7. Okay? And that seems to straighten out our curve, our K over S curve. Okay? So now we have input 3 of our dye stuff. It gives us the time it was created, when it was modified, our DE after the modifications, a minimum concentration, which is 0 for all of these, and then maximum concentration, 2.5 for these and 3.5 for the others. If you needed to formulate higher than this max concentration, this green area, you can adjust it. So say, for example, I wanted to go higher then 3.5. Here I could go to 4. And then the system would allow me to formulate above 3.5 up to 4. Okay, and here is our methods for adjusting the curves. We've measured, smoothed, and measured in this case. Allow k over k to be greater than 0. Helps fix problems with the k over s curve, the build curve, because of possibly bad dyings, number of samples, and the strength of the dye stuff. And we normally start with a strength of 100. Okay, so once we put this in, we want to make sure everything is calibrated. So we want to, for this sample, we want to calculate single and store. So we have our good curve locked in, and then we'll hit end, and we see our Colorant Set name reactives there listed. And if we want to go back to our home page, there's the overview button right at the top left.